All right, we are live now.
And we are. Good morning, everyone from Melbourne, and good afternoon if you are based anywhere in US, Canada, and it'll be good evening to anybody as well who's based in Europe, and they're probably sleeping. So today we're going to be talking about how to get your Polish passport in 4 steps. What I'd like to do now is introduce you to someone that's very knowledgeable and has agreed to share his knowledge with us. On your screen, you see there Adam Marcinkowski, who's one of our senior specialists here at Polaron. Hello, Adam.
Hello, everyone. Hello, everyone all over the world. Hopefully, some people from Europe as well. Yes, and thank you for the introduction, Eva. We will today explain briefly, but specifically what those steps are.
Yes, thank you. So we'll try and be very structured, and it is a pretty complex process, which we'll try and chunk up for you so that you have a pretty good understanding of how it all works. As usual, we will have time for questions afterwards. So the first part of the session will last for about 20 minutes, in which we will cover 4 steps of getting a Polish passport. Adam, what's step 1 in getting your Polish passport? If you could explain to people how it all works.
So firstly, the brief of what getting a passport is. Of course, we have to apply and confirm one's citizenship. But before or with that application, we have to be able to submit documents that support an application. Now, those documents could be provided by clients. Occasionally they are, but the majority of our clients require some type of ancestry research. Ancestry research that sources documents that demonstrate the ancestors' Polish citizenship, as well as possibly linking the ancestor through vital records like birth certificates and marriage certificates to the actual applicant.
So I'm so glad that you've explained it in such a clear way, because often when people ask about citizenship, they know vaguely that somebody was Polish, or, we sometimes start with people who don't know the proper names of their ancestors. So I think that the first part of, firstly, what we do, but also what people need to do if they want to pursue it themselves, is to get their documentation right, but also to be certain that they're eligible. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, so before anyone becomes a client, and people that are probably with us that perhaps already clients have been through the process or are about to become a client with us are through that process, we, when assessing and analyzing originally, when people approach us for the assistance in confirming their Polish citizenship, we analyze the family tree, we analyze any documents that they have, we talk to them about the information that they have. A lot of the information could be in their heads, and we put it down on the paper, we put it down in a family tree document. Using these documents, we then identify that one ancestor, because that's Polish citizenship legislation. Polish citizenship legislation allows one ancestor to be able to confirm through generations, confirm Polish citizenship. So at that early stages, we identify the ancestor and we identify the documents that will be required. As I said, some of these documents people will, or our clients will have, but majority we do have to source through archival research. That archival research could be in Poland, but could also be in countries like Ukraine, Belarus, or Lithuania, and that is due to the fact that through Poland's history after World War II in 1945, the borders have changed. Basically, the whole country shifted to the west. So part of the archival research that we do isn't just in Poland; it is also in what we call former territories of Poland, which also are those 3 countries that I have mentioned.
Okay. So step 1 in obtaining a Polish passport, have a Polish ancestor, at least one. And within that step, have documents. Otherwise, do not bother, essentially is the message. Because if you do, you're setting yourself up to fail, actually, because the Polish government does want to see Polish documents in order to proceed with your application. Otherwise, you can get kind of stuck in the system and not be successful without proper Polish documents. And ones that link you to your ancestor. What's step 2, Adam?
So step 2, once we have those documents, the documents that we were able to source on behalf of our clients through the representation, step 2 is we are ready to lodge the application. We lodge the application directly with Polish government. It is an institution that is called Voivodeship Office. For majority of our clients, because they're born abroad, that will be the Mazovian Voivodeship Office, which is the central institution in Warsaw. These are people that they call themselves inspectors, but realistically, they're case managers. So they will receive the application and they will analyze, assess, check the merits of the case. And the biggest part, of course, is those documents that we procured in step 1.
Okay. And what do people get as an outcome of that process? Because we know that sometimes it takes several weeks, if not months, to do it. What are we working towards as an outcome with the Voivodeship Office?
The outcome in this particular process that we are talking about is confirmation of citizenship. So it's a certificate that someone has held a citizenship from birth. That's why it is called confirmation. And what that means is through those documents from step 1, we were able to demonstrate that someone was a Polish citizen from birth.
So that's interesting. So often when I talk to people, I'll tell them that they kind of already are Polish citizens, and the process is confirmation, linking them to their ancestors. And as you said, when the certificate of citizenship is issued, that lists them as being Polish from the day they were born, because the legislation is through blood. That's in summary, yeah?
That is correct. We should perhaps briefly mention here that the legislations, there is 4 of them that we use through the process from 1920 to 1951, 1951 to 1962, and the current one from 2012. So depending on within which period, the circumstances that we're trying to demonstrate to our Polish government, that is that legislation that is relevant to that circumstance that have occurred.
So could you just clarify for people that are listening? So basically, there's current legislation in Poland that governs citizenship, but what Poland relies on is past legislation. Can you maybe explain or explore that a little bit as to why they do that?
Yes, of course. So the latest Citizenship Act or citizenship legislation in Poland, which came into operation in 2012, governs the process or describes the process that we are engaging our clients in, or representing our clients in. However, everything that has happened to their ancestors, so if someone migrated out of Poland in 1926 and married in United States or Australia or Canada in 1928, that circumstance, that marriage, the Polish government will look at that event in accordance with the legislation that was in place back then, which means the 1920 legislation.
Okay. So they're kind of testing all of that legislation in relation to the client, or to the applicant, I should say. And they check whether anything happened between the time that the ancestor left Poland and the time that the person was born, the applicant was born, to exclude any possibility that they've lost citizenship, if that makes sense. Yeah, is it? Yeah. That
is correct, and they have to apply the relevant Citizenship Act, and relevance means that the event has happened in the time that Citizenship Act was in operation.
Okay, so what we described there is step 2, confirmation of citizenship. As an outcome of that, you get a citizenship certificate from birth. What's step 3, Adam?
So step 3, which will make a little bit more sense when we cover step 4. Step 3 is registering vital records. Registering vital records, what are they? They're birth certificates and marriage certificates in essence. However, a marriage certificate also it means that it demonstrates or establishes marital status. So while divorce, if anyone has had a divorce in the past, well, it's not a vital record per se. When it comes to, in a moment, we will describe step 4, which is applying for the actual passport. During that process, all documents have to be in order, if you like, and that is obvious that any identity documents like birth certificates, anyone that has applied for a passport anywhere in the world knows that they have to supply their birth certificate. So that birth certificate in step 3 has to be transcribed and translated. So they are existing documents that people have from the country of their origins. However, to apply for Polish passport, those documents have to be Polish documents. You can apply for Polish passport with a Australian or Canadian birth certificate. It has to be a Polish birth certificate, and so has to be marriage certificate. And if any divorces have happened, some of them have to be registered through Polish courts of law. So that process behind the scenes, we of course have to, while registering these, we have to make sure that all the spellings are correct in those countries that we're describing, or those countries where our clients come from, like Australia, Canada, United States, UK to a certain extent as well. We often find different spellings on different vital records. And that is a big no-no in a bureaucratic country like Poland. We have to make sure that everything is in order, all changes of names. And if those changes of names didn't happen officially, we have to provide that explanation to Polish authorities. And then we are able to translate them and register them, and they can be used then in the application for the actual passport.
Okay, so I think what you just described, so that people can get their heads around in those 3 steps, and we move on to step 4 in a moment, is this, that Poland doesn't know that you exist. You know, so you kind of, the burden of proof is on you to prove that, that you were born, married or whatever it is, and then that you have a Polish ancestor from whom you kind of inherited your Polish citizenship. So in order to make yourself known to the Polish government, you have to go through a number of steps. The first one is confirm your citizenship, so that you have a piece of paper that actually says, you know, John Smith is a Polish citizen. Then you have to get your vital records, which is a birth, marriage certificate, to regulate your civil status, because otherwise Poland won't know that you were married or divorced, let's say. These are required for step 4, which is, what is step 4, Adam?
Step 4 is the application for the passport. So hooray, we have gone through everything, and our clients hold all the required documents, and step 4 is they can apply for the passport. And so majority of people will have 3 documents when applying for passports, and that will be the certificate of citizenship, which we have discussed in step 2, birth certificate, Polish birth certificate stating that someone was born wherever they were born, Polish marriage certificate, again, it's a transcription of the original document, but Polish document. And with these 3 documents, they are able to apply for their passport. They will, in today's day and age, those passports are biometrics, so there will be fingerprints taken. And this is a step that we cannot represent an individual through because of those biometrics, and because of identity fraud issues. A person has to apply in person. Usually that happens through the consulate, wherever an individual is placed. Can be, of course, can be done in Poland through the same institution, which I have mentioned earlier, the voivodeship office. The application can also be done directly in Poland, but for majority of people, it is through the consulate wherever it is that they live. During that step 4, people are issued with a personal number. A personal number is a unique identification number. If we compare it to United States as an example, probably the best example known all over the world. It's like a social security number. There's very few basic questions. The application itself it's really a page and a half for the passport and a page for the personal number. We of course assist with things like glossaries and explain to our clients and prepare them for the appointment, which they have to attend in person. They submit those applications. The Polish language isn't a necessity. And like I said, we provide glossaries for people to know how to fill in these applications. And about 6 to 12 weeks later, depending on where you are in the world, you are a proud holder of the Polish passport.
So with the language requirement, that's one of the questions we get asked about a lot. Because you're applying through the law of blood or ancestry, you do not need to speak Polish. It's your birthright, but we of course encourage people to learn the language, and many people do. But I think it's fair to say that a lot of people struggle with the official Polish. So that is why we provide glossaries and help people fill in forms. Because you might be able to even communicate at a basic level, but when it comes to anything a bit more complex, it's harder. We should mention here, Adam, I was going to ask you about how you can go through this process, and we at Polaron are very transparent, and we do tell people that there are several avenues to getting your passport. Could you tell us what they are?
Of course, you can do it yourself, or if you're living abroad, you can ask a family member that lives in Poland to assist you with that. You do need to ask someone that is in Poland, because of Polish authorities will not communicate with or will not send communications to addresses abroad. So it has to be someone in Poland that is like a proxy. So that's a family member. Another option is if you don't have a family member in Poland and you don't have that address where Polish government can send communications to, you can do it through the consulate, wherever it is that you are in the world. There are, and thank you, Eva, of course you're transparent and we make it very clear. There are traps, I guess, or the people would have to be very careful in employing this sort of strategy. And we always tell people, of course, you can, but be aware that we often pick up the pieces from failed applications. Worst case scenario, we cannot fix it, which means someone that was at the start of the process eligible and could have the citizenship conferred without the issues, because they employed those two options that we have just discussed, they no longer able to confirm, or it's very expensive and involves lawyers.
And of course, for even going through the consular avenue, you still have to have a representative in Poland. So you do have to nominate someone to act on your behalf in Poland, even if you do submit your application through the consulate. So a lot of our clients rely on us to do the processing because of the complexity of it. And, you know, we've said in previous webinars that we do guarantee outcomes of applications for people that work through us. And I think one of the other important things that we should say at the outset is that we only take cases on that are bound to be successful. And that is why we invest time with prospective clients at the outset to work out whether they're even eligible, which is sort of like a behind the scenes step you know, zero, I guess, because we have to be certain that a person does qualify. Otherwise, there's no point of proceeding with all of this. So could you maybe give us a bit of background of how that works at Polaron?
Absolutely. So through the early stages, and that is most of the time free service that we provide, or on and off sort of a thing. So if anyone sees on our Facebook page or through any material that you communicate with us and you're not yet a client, please take the advantage of those free eligibility assessments. So through that eligibility assessment, we identify that ancestor, and we are able right from the outset to say that someone most certainly qualifies to have the citizenship confirmed. We do that through tools like a family tree that I have mentioned earlier. We will, once we completed step 1 and we go on to step 2, which is the application, we will guarantee the positive outcome. So we do provide money back guarantee, and that is through the strict and specific assessment of the cases that we do. I've mentioned all those legislations as well. Not only myself, not only Eva, there's other people in the business, there's our staff in Poland. We do understand those legislations. Some people ask me, well, why can't I go with an immigration lawyer in Poland? I guess you know, they greatly placed for getting maybe different processes engaged. But when it comes to confirmation of citizenship for people that were born in those countries that we are talking about, we will assess through the family tree and documents and information specifically, and we will guarantee the positive outcome.
So there was a couple of things you've mentioned there that I wanted to touch on before we move on to questions. But you said a few very, very interesting things, and one is going through a lawyer. And I think, you know, I say, do your own research. You know, it's a big investment. There are lots of provisions in the law that you described that you need to be aware of. But going through the process of confirmation of citizenship isn't a legal process. I really need people to understand that it's an administrative process. So the legislation you were talking about applies, but the process you go through is the administrative code. So Poland's got codes when it deals with anything like that. So it's not a legal process. You don't need to go to court or plead your case. All you need to do is satisfy certain requirements to get your citizenship confirmed, same with registration of your vital records. So that's one thing that I wanted to make clear, and maybe you can comment on further.
Yes, so often talking to clients, or when assessing clients' case, I often say, I think the best way to illustrate that is that those case officers at Voivodeship office, on one side of the desk, they have a Citizenship Act or Acts, depending on which date we are talking about. They have the client's application in the middle, and on the right-hand side, they have the code of administrative procedure. And basically what that means is they go through ticking off boxes. And you're absolutely right, because they do everything through that code of administrative procedure. Lawyer's assistance or lawyer's representation is a little bit, on one hand, it's a little bit overkill, but on the other hand, it is also not the right type of expertise.
Yeah, I think we.
So yeah, so that yeah.
Cool. No, we just lost you there for a minute. So look, I think that's an excellent overview of the process. Thank you very much. And as always, people are free to contact us and ask more specific questions. But what I'm going to do now is hand over to Andrea, because I know that our little live sessions always create lots of interest. So over to you, Andrea, for questions.
Yes, so we have so far 3 questions for you guys. One of them is, can a grandchild get citizenship from grandparents if the parents weren't Polish citizens because of war or displacement?
Mm-hmm. So I think the way to explain this is that there's no limit on generations of how many people can go through the process. So, you know, you can go, you know, your grandchildren, your great-grandchildren can go through it. The link between the generations has to be proven, but you don't have to, you know, in this case, the parents don't have to go through the process themselves, if that makes sense. So you still have to prove that the grandchild is a son of whoever, and then that son is, you know, son of whoever else. But that person, that parent, does not have to apply for a passport or go through formally the process of confirmation of citizenship or registration of vital records in Poland.
All right, thank you so much, Eva. There's a question from Nathan. I understand that one must prove that their ancestor didn't serve in a foreign army. How does one obtain such evidence from Israel, British Palestine, when they are reluctant to give such documents and typically state that all citizens are considered to be reservists?
I'll let Adam handle that, but it's a pain in the neck is the best way I can describe it. It's really, really difficult. And maybe I'll firstly, before I hand over to Adam, explain, and Nathan's put it in very clear and easy to understand terms. But before legislation changed in Poland, service in a foreign army or service in foreign, what do you call it, Adam? Help me. Army and public service, that's it, may have resulted in loss of citizenship. So Israel and a few other countries where military service was compulsory, it's not an anomaly, but it's something that we have to explain to the Polish government. And Nathan is absolutely right that it's really, really hard to get from Israel and from a few other countries like Colombia, for example, where the government might be reluctant. So over to you, Adam, maybe you can tell us a bit more about that.
Yeah, so first of all, Nathan, send us an email and we'll send you an examples of these documents, so at least you'll know what is required. They're not impossible, they are difficult, but we most certainly have clients that have acquired those documents and we can show you those examples. Now, why and how does it fall into the Citizenship Act? So we said that the first one was 1920, soon after the Polish establishing its independence in 1918. And in that act, what it says is that Polish citizenship will be lost if someone acquires foreign citizenship. So if someone was naturalized in US, Australia, or Canada, or UK, that means that within that legislation, it says you would lose your Polish citizenship, except right underneath that, there is another paragraph that says that Poland will not allow you to, or not release you from your obligation as a citizen if you are required to serve in the army. And conscription, up until not that long ago, was compulsory in Poland. Was compulsory for male. So if we are talking about male, even though the 1920 citizenship says the requirement of foreign citizenship loses Polish citizenship, if you haven't served in the foreign army, which means you haven't committed a treason, that means you are still a Polish citizen, regardless of your naturalization abroad. That obviously applies to males. Now, that has changed in 1951. So when we're talking about Israel, we have this situation of establishment of Israel in 1948 and 1951, 3 risky years, I guess, and end of World War II as well. So quite a few people, whether they established their lives in Israel or moved on somewhere else, but a lot of our clients have traveled through that. But the reason is, yes, up until 1951, service in foreign army was a problem. In this particular case, we are talking about Israel, so we cannot talk about allied forces. However, if someone served in US Army or Canadian Army during World War II, they are considered as allied forces. It is looked at differently. But Israel, yes, difficult to acquire those documents, not impossible. And it is that period between 48 and 51 that both naturalization and if naturalization happened, army service documents are required. And if there is no army service, we can most certainly confirm the Polish citizenship.
So because of that reason, a lot of people that went to Israel are not eligible. So if people's grandfathers, so this only applies to males, as Adam said, were subject to conscription, so they didn't even have to serve in the army, but by virtue of, settling in Israel, they would automatically become Israeli citizens. And the interesting thing with Israel is that once it was established in 1948, the first set of citizenship laws were put in place in 1952. But what Israel actually does, it backdates everybody's citizenship to 1948, to the date that the state of Israel was established. And prior to that, of course, there was Palestine under the British mandate. But generally speaking, and sometimes it's looked upon, by people of Jewish background as a impediment that's kind of has, I would even say, sort of somewhat anti-Semitic connotations, but it is just how the law operates, and how people of Polish origins that went to Israel were automatically given, sometimes without knowing, Israeli citizenship. So the legislation that Adam described kind of intersects and creates this, I guess, impediment for a lot of people. And we're talking about most people, actually, because, when you went to Israel, you were expected to serve in the army, and until today. But it does, documents are difficult to get from Israel. If you need any help with that, let us know. But everybody struggles with it. So Nathan, you're not alone, if that helps. Okay, Andrea.
Thank you. Jen would like to know if Polaron can find documents that were lost in the war. For example, birth certificate during the 1920s.
Yes, we can. And I'll hand over to Adam in a moment. But generally speaking, whenever I talk to clients, which is not that often anymore, unfortunately, it's my favorite part of my job, I tell them this, that it is often assumed, it's a bit of a myth, that Poland doesn't have documents. In fact, it's one of the best countries for documents, except for a couple of areas, but you have to know where to look. And you have to start with precise information, because there isn't a centralized database where you can type things in. It's not like ancestry.com or National Archives of Australia where everything's kept. You have to go to the source. So your ancestral village, the town your family comes from. You have to know what period of time we're talking about. And you have to do what's called manual search. So some records are digitalized, most are not. Over to you, Adam, but I think it's fair to say if the documents exist, we will find them. But maybe you can comment on research a little bit here at this point.
Yep, so that is that step one that we're talking about, which is sourcing those documents, and that is what we do. That is a huge part of our service, because it's easy to have to fill in an application once the documents exist. But the biggest part of the service is getting those documents. And just to elaborate a little bit on the process, it is backtracked. And I think if we are talking, perhaps, we're talking about records from 1920s or 30s, and we worried that they got destroyed because of World War II, maybe not necessarily destroyed because of World War II, but also the displacement of World War II means that people don't have those documents when they moved on to countries like US. So it's a matter of backtracking. Of course, during the early stages, it is talking and getting the information about one's ancestors. Some people don't have a lot of information, so it is up to us to backtrack. We backtrack, of course, through US. If World War II displacement has happened, we backtrack through those archives in Germany. And with that information, we are able to go to those archives that Eva has mentioned. And yeah, most of the time we are successful. That is what we do. Anyone can fill in the application, but how do you support the evidence of documents that support that application?
And that's very true. And on that note, we can finish and thank Adam very much for participating in today's webinar and painting a picture of how to get a Polish passport in 4 steps. It is an interesting process, and I think just by way of summarizing, I will say that for a lot of our clients, and I've said that before, it starts off as wanting to have, European passport. Basically, they want to move to Europe or have a second passport or whatever it is. But it ends up being a journey of discovery. There are so many things that we read between the lines with our clients. All the research outcomes are made available to them. And often they shared with other family members, or they're very precious and very much appreciated. So whatever we find, is given to clients, and we do learn a lot more about our client's history than what we start off with. So on that note, thank you, Andrew. Adam, thank you very much for sharing your knowledge, which is very extensive and very detailed. I'm glad that you can quote all the legislation. I certainly can't. So it's good to know that we have an expert on board. Anybody wants to know anything else other than we've covered, please get in contact. And on that note, thank you very much and goodbye.
Thank you.
Thanks.